Thanks for joining us as we look into the Islamic version of the Just War Theory. We looked at the Western version a few weeks ago, and we've been applying it through different individuals in the last few weeks. And now we're going to take a bit of a turn here because we're looking at conflict, not only now, but also in the last, say, 1,400 years or
1,400 years continuously, and there's a reason why.
And we'll look at do our best and make an honest, concerted effort to, unbiased, to look at scriptures, Islamic scriptures, both the Quran, the Hadiths, and to say, is this what is the picture of a just war? Just like we have done with the Western version, we're going to do the same with the Islamic version, and then we're going to do a comparison side by side. So we have today brought on our very own David Schwartz. So
look at that, he's getting all professional. Look,
did you see it? You see it?
Him.
That makes him look smart.
He looks smart.
Let me see if I can look at that. Look, I finally set up my own background. My wife and I spent a while today, but we finally got the bookshelves in this room instead.
That looks nice. It looks
Sharp.
nice. With the glass, he's wearing glasses. You're wearing glasses, and he has a lot more books in his background than we do.
That means he's more intelligent.
It does.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
How many books you have?
It is. That's all it is.
That's true. All Christian apologists say so.
You don't have to read them.
Yeah, just don't get in contest with Anthony Rogers. You will lose with that book.
Yeah, I will. It's true, dude. He's got a library back there.
That's pretty wild. So I'm excited about today because we did look previously, and I'm going to put the link up here somewhere after we're done. 12 hours from now, the link's going to be there, talking about what we had talked about before.
We're live streaming for 12 hours?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wait.
No. That's when YouTube will allow me to put it up there. I wish I could put it up there now, but I can't. But it's a link to our previous one we had with, I want to call you Dr. David, but I know that's not
yet.
Not yet.
That's what the plan is. So we did that. We delved into it. And so today is going to be more of an academic study, I guess. So if that's something that doesn't interest you, we'll try to summarize this as much as possible. If you're looking at this after the live stream, you can fast forward a little bit to it. But we want to make an honest approach to this. So before we dive in, I see we've already got the live stream. The chat is rather lively. People,
Jack Ray.
Jack Ray, people of the bookshelf.
People of the bookshelf. There we are. People of the bookshelf. New t-shirt.
That's
that
cool. Would be a good t-shirt, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be a good t-shirt. You can send it to Mike Winger, and he could actually wear that one.
Yes, people of the bookshelf.
Yes, and we've got a when is started. Do not like this new dates on YouTube. I have no idea what they're displaying.
If you don't see anything, refresh. But then again, if you don't see it, then you aren't hear us. I know that YouTube's had issues in the past.
Yeah, you just saw a notification that YouTube is having problems tonight. So
So
hopefully that's not going to be an issue with this. Now they're just following the pagan way, not too much different from the pagans of old, Assyrians and Romans.
It's true of Islam. It's true. Yeah, Islam is pretty pagan in its
the actual topic of the live stream.
Oh, the actual topic. Not just
Jack Ray's on the topic, even though we might be off in the left field. He is on the ball.
So I'm going to put up real quick. Previously, we were looking at the contemporary just war theory. Now, this has gone through several iterations since the 4th and 5th century. And it started off with just a handful of subjects before, during, and after the war. And I believe the first just war theory that came out with, was it Augustine? May have came out. There was not a after the war. And so I'm going to walk through these real quick because we've already covered this. But then we're going to get into the real fun stuff and look at what Islam has as a possible alternative, both written and historical. So you say one thing and then,
do
what
another.
you do.
So what is their actual code of conduct versus what they did in the past?
Yes.
And
the real challenge for us right now is not, can we cover it? We're not going to be able to cover this all, but we're going to try to do the best we can in a short amount of time. So starting off with the top, legitimate authority. Is there if you're going to have a just war, so these are the things you want to do before you go to war. And we're looking at this right now in current events
with Iran and Israel and even America. Yes.
Right. And I was on your channel last
We did
Friday.
it on my channel. Yep.
And we talked about the conflict with Israel, went through this list and applied it to the current conflict, at least from Israel's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to give away what the conclusion was, but we went step by step for each one, and then we had a pretty good discussion with it. Okay, so legitimate authority, either it is a state that is declaring war, not just like Rufus down the street, who's a homeless guy, declares war in Canada. That's not going to work.
It would be entertaining, though.
UN. What's that?
It would be entertaining.
Yeah, it would be
entertaining.
Yeah, I think I said in our first live stream that if I'm at the border with Canada or Mexico, let's just do Mexico because I don't want to pick on Canada. They say, "Do you have anything to declare, sir?" And I say, "Yeah, war." It's not going to work. Okay,
Canada might work.
Yeah, I don't know. So the second one is a just cause, either self-defense, humanitarian intervention, or right to protect. That's the R2P, right to protect someone else. There is another country they're doing that. We had done that in the original Gulf War, Desert Storm, when it was Kuwait that was attacked, and we said, "Oh, we have a right to protect." And that's a whole nother discussion whether that was justified or not. But there you go. That was used as a justification. Third is right intention. How you're going to handle that. Is it just a land grab? Is it something else that's going? Proportionality. You are proportional means to the war that's being done. Somebody is bumps up against you, and there's maybe they accidentally sink a ship, one of your cargo ships, and you nuke them back to the Stone Ages. That is not proportionality. Mm-hmm. Last resort, diplomacy is there, top on the list. Reasonable chances of success. You don't, and this is one of the more recent ones. This was not Aristotle that had put this in there, but you don't want to go to war if you have no chance of doing it. Mm-hmm. It would not be fair to your people to do it, and not to theirs. Public declaration. You want to say we are declaring war, and then during the war, proportionality, minimize collateral damage, discrimination, strict civilian protection. So you want to limit the civilian casualties. Compliance with Geneva Conventions or other conventions is another one you can tell. Aristotle did not put that in there. Yeah. That was recent, right? Rules for new tech. Again, Aristotle did not have this. Drones, cyber warfare. How do you handle that? Within our lifetimes, maybe not mine, but yours, you'll probably have AI killer bots that are out there. I hope not. Hopefully that'll be a part of some kind of new, just like you say, hey, no chemical warfare, which would be another one. We won't have that.
But it doesn't mean everyone will actually go with it.
No, that's the problem, right?
Yep. You need someone with a big enough stick to enforce the rules.
Yeah. And then justice after war, reconstruction. Again, this is the newer versions. I think this is after the Enlightenment. They started adding this. Reconstruction, accountability, war crimes tribunals, and reconciliation. Try to make peace afterwards. You don't want to necessarily do what you did after World War I. Pay up, buddy. And there's no way for the guy to pay up. And then you got all sorts of other problems that come up. And it's like, okay, part 2, let's go. Yeah. And then another thing that you could look at in the last 30 years or so, the U.S. having gone in, we've talked about regime change. We're going to go in, give everybody a chance for democracy. That doesn't look like it's worked out very well. I don't want to get too controversial, but that's the type of things that were done afterwards. Okay, everybody good on that? I'm going to check chat real quick, see what we're looking at for that. And boy, do you have anything that you want to add to that, David, as I'm checking the chat?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think what's really interesting is that, of course, Western contemporary just war theory, as we understand it today, is based off of Augustine's reasoning through the scripture, through a ethical approach to war. And it is the foundation of most Western considerations of joining a war, being a part of a war, and the way that a war is properly ended and reconstructed. So the reason this is important for anyone who's watching is that this is extremely relevant today. Okay, maybe you're not that interested in the concept of just war theory or considerations of ethics more broadly, but you probably should be interested in things like the question about Iran's pursuit of nuclear power, why it is, and this is really important. I even saw some memes about this today. Well, if Israel's just attacking Iran because they are going after nukes, well, America's got nukes, so America's next. No, that's not how these just war considerations actually work. When Israel made that engagement, it struck Iran's nuclear facility and some of its most distinguished nuclear scientists at that nuclear facility. There was a reason. That wasn't just a country is going after nuclear bombs. There is something specific about Iran having nuclear bombs that poses an existential threat, not just to Israel, but technically to the world more broadly, with America being the great Satan. So just, understand there is a reason that this stuff is important. And if you don't think it's important yet, just wait until this war gets more expansive.
And we don't know which direction it's going in, right?
Yeah,
I'm hoping it does not get any more expansive. That's what the hope is here. So, and also, I'm not trying to make a specific comment on any. It's going to sound strange. I don't want to get political. I'm talking just basic principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a question that was asked here by Dak. If I'm pronouncing it correctly, Islam's Just War Doctrine revealed. What does that even mean? So it has to do with the title of the live stream. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make an honest effort to look at the scriptures of
they
Islam.
would consider just war.
What they would consider,
what the West would consider just war.
Good question.
Right. Did you want to take a stab at that, David, to rephrase that or to try to answer the question?
Well, it is kind of, I agree with Decay if he's just kind of confused about it. I am too. I don't know if Islam's theory of just war is really comparable to the Christian source, more broad Western concept of just war. So it almost sounds a little bit like nonsense, right? When you say Islam's just war theory, well, the only thing that's just is doing the will of Allah, right? So, and Mohammad. So maybe it's just like, to them, it's kind of a contradiction. And I guarantee you, I've done some research on this topic. I kind of get exactly what they mean. This isn't just an ethical question. This actually might make Islam and Allah impossible. I know that sounds like a strong claim, but believe it or not, this discussion might show that Islam and Allah are impossible to be true. It's impossible for it to be true, but we'll get into that.
Okay, boy, you've got my appetite wet with that. I want to know where that's going. So we're looking at let's take a stab, and I'm going to bring up a poll. We have a poll that's out there right now. If you look at the community page for this, the poll is asking the question. What is the key rule for just war in Islam? And there are 4 answers for that. And again, these are. I'm not saying these are the only answers. I'm just saying that these are answers for fight only in self-defense, protect non-combatants, fight unbelievers until jizya or something else, or not sure. And so I'm not going to say what the results of that poll out there. If you want to jump on there real quickly, you can and put your 2 cents in. And there's an area in the comment section there too that you can make some comments as well. So we'll look at that poll here in a couple of minutes. Would you? So we have the just war theory or doctrine for the West, and like you said, this is something that's developed, and they're not really hard and fast rules. Would you say that they're well?
The code
I would say
is more what you call guidelines than actual rules.
Yes,
and
I
so,
would.
So the reason why I'm saying that is because it's almost like a judgment. You have to look at each case that comes up is going to be a little bit different, and you're going to try to do your best to keep to these rules. You don't. The bad thing about war, one of the bad things is it generally goes off the rails. Even if you have the best of intentions and everything like that happens, some jerk of a general does something he shouldn't, or some, major or something goes off the rails, and you've got some war crimes that are on your side because somebody did something stupid. So let's take a look at this again. This is the Western contemporary version, but we're gonna scoot down just a bit and look at.
Okay, now we're going to go into what's known as Sharia.
There we go.
Because it's always fun to read pages and pages and pages in Reliance of the Traveler, the Sharia Law Handbook. So it's always so much fun to go
Okay,
through
so
that.
tell me a little bit about this. We've got these are numbered here, and this is a little bit difficult to do because we have these three categories: it's before war, in preparation for war, during war, and then after war. And some of these kind of bridge in between the two. It's a little bit hard to.
It's not clear cut.
It's not
It's
clear.
not clear
Yeah.
cut. So it's not a one.
Especially with Islam.
Yeah, it gets very confusing.
Okay. So and I'm looking at the numbers here. It's a one. The first one is you had in parentheses 09.0 and then Q something.
Okay.
I know what they are, but I'm playing.
Yes. Okay. So the way we have this set up here is 09.0 is the reference in Reliance of the Traveler to what it actually says. So that would be the reference that you could find this under. And this is what the Muslim scholars quote according to their understanding and apply it to today. So this is not something that's like a long time ago. This is not something that's a little bit ago. This is something that's current to today. So let's go ahead and look at a couple of them. First of all, they go to Quran. That's what the Q stands for. To 216, which talks about fighting is prescribed for you. That being said, fighting in that way, I believe the rest of the verse talks about, you don't like it. You might not be comfortable with it, but you know what? It's prescribed for you. It's ordered for you. You have to do it. The next one in line, of course, is, and this is just in the very introduction of this section. This section is about jihad. And just to let you know, there is no difference under Sharia between jihad and any. Hear us.
There he is.
Some
again.
technical difficulties here on both of us. There we go.
We did say at the beginning that there was issues with YouTube, so
There we go.
yes.
That would be some of the problem. 1 second here. Let's get this back up
I can do
and
it.
running. Go.
Okay, so I'm going to do the presentation window.
While you guys do that, hello everybody. Don't worry, we're back. It's okay.
There we go. We are back online.
Oh, and
Fantastic. Okay.
one quick point, just based off some things I saw in the comments. It doesn't matter if you think that this is about quote unquote strict Muslims or not. This is about Islamic teaching. Okay. So just for anyone, any of the Muslims that are a little confused in the comments, it really doesn't matter if you have strict Muslim friends or family who would or would not support this. The question is, what does the Quran say? Okay. If you want to ignore the Quran, that's okay.
It's not only that, this is from Sharia itself. So this is the ruling of the Muslim elites, the Muslim scholars, and to question their authority is an act of apostasy.
Yeah.
So to say, I don't believe what the Muslim scholars tell me, if it's your type, because this would apply to Shia, if it's not Shia, Sunni. This would apply to Sunni. If you are Sunni and you say, I don't believe this, that is an act of apostasy. You have left Islam.
Yeah. And now,
Just
what if
by
someone
saying
said,
you don't believe this?
what if someone said there's probably context to these verses? Is this like the Bible where you could say there's a historical context to the verses theologically? Or would you say that these are eternal because they're in the mind of Allah?
These are eternal because they're in the mind of Allah, and I've bypassed all of that because I'm going to the Muslim scholars' rulings on them. This
Thank
is
you very
what
much.
they say is absolute. So under jihad, these are the verses they chose to go to say, hey, you need to do this. Where it says, where the Quran says, slay them wherever you find them. Fight the idolaters utterly. That is what they chose to go to, not what I chose. They're the ones who chose it. And they're the ones that every Muslim tells me to go ask for whenever I have any questions. So they would be the absolute authority to this. Now, jihad is broken up into two different categories. You do have the lesser jihad, which is the physical fighting, which is what we're looking at today. And then you have the greater jihad, which is referred to under there as the personal struggle. This section doesn't deal with the personal struggle. only with the actual warfare aspect of it. And underneath there, it's then broken up again into two different obligations, and these are both obligatory. You have communal obligation, which would be aggressive warfare, constant aggressive warfare. And the alternative would be personal obligation. So that would be defensive. So if it's defensive, you're personally required to fight against it. If it is offensive, it is the entire community that is required to fight. So, and we have multiple quotes on here. Aggressive is communal. Okay, that one did 0.7, did that one 0.8. Who is obligated to fight in jihad according to Sharia and according to the Muslim scholars? Those called upon. So anyone who's called upon are those who are able-bodied, any able-bodied men who has reached the age of puberty and is sane. So they are the ones who would be into that aggressive community obligation that they'd have to do. So, and then the objective of it, according to the Quran and Sharia, is that the caliph must fight all other people until they become Muslim. That is found in the Quran. The reference they gave for that.
Muslim scholars.
Actually, that was a mistype. It's 929.
929.
Not 939. It's 929.
I can make that change right
Sorry,
now.
that was a typo.
All right. Again, Muslims that are watching and comments and getting all upset. All we're doing is just reading from the Quran and quoting Muslim scholars' interpretations of the Quran, right?
And this is where I pointed you guys to. I gave you guys 09.0 is where most of this comes from. You have 09.1, which you can find, again, under Reliance of the Traveler, which is the handbook you are given about Sharia by the Muslim scholars. 909.9 is the one that's talking about why you are to go to war, why you need to have this aggression, is because everyone needs to become Muslim.
Nice. Now, let's definitely stay on this just ad bellum, justice of war one real quick, because I actually wanted to show you, if I could, the liberal scholars' interpretation
Do you want
of justice of war.
Is this what you had?
Yes.
You shared? Okay, you'll need to represent it because...
Sure thing. I think I made it a little bit larger on screen, so hopefully this time, share screen, it'll be a bit easier. Because I actually wanted to show some of the ways that some of the Muslims in the comments, I expected some of the Muslims in the comments to react the way they did, so I decided to make a table that will hopefully show this a little bit wider. So here's the quote-unquote ideal Islamic standard from like a more liberal Muslim viewpoint, and I'm going to show why you guys presented a much more accurate version than what they're taking from the Quran. So here's the Islamic, like more liberal Islamic approach. This more like more Western Muslims who steal from the Christian concept of legitimate authority. Look at this. According to some more liberal Muslim scholars, they'll say, well, legitimate authority, only lawful rulers can declare war. Here's the issue, and that's in Quran 459. Here's the issue. This is what Muhammad did. Muhammad conducted surprise raids before Medina had state-like legitimacy. Right? This is in Sahih al-Bukhari 17331. He conducted surprise raids before Medina had any state-like legitimacy. There's no legitimate authority being established here, and yet it says only lawful rulers can declare war, is what some liberal Islamic individuals, like those in the comments, would try to argue.
Well, can I break in there and I guess play devil's advocate a little bit? The legitimate authority then that would be used by the West would say we have a state-size authority to do it, right? The legitimate authority used here, I believe, would be I am the prophet, therefore what I say can be done.
Well, the problem is he didn't have, at this point, a state or actual control or authority over anything other than just his select few followers in Medina at the time. because he hadn't even taken over Medina at this time. So he doesn't even have an entire city that's following him. That was
right. Yeah. So in the Western eyes is he is just basically a warlord going around taking different places, right? He is not a state. He's not a legitimate government.
At this point, he's just raiding.
Just a raider. So, but from their point of view, it would be, well, he is a prophet and he has the words of God, therefore he can go and basically do as he sees fit.
Well, that's why I was going through the actual Sharia on that and saying this is what Islam actually teaches according to Muslim scholars. That being said, Muhammad definitely violated some of the rules they even put forth.
Okay.
Yeah, and that'll become more clear as we go through, because yes, some Muslims will try to make the claim that legitimate authority is intrinsic to Muhammad essentially, but this does confuse their notion of a just war, because if that's the case, that being a prophet is a different category, well then we could at that point just say that we have to question what it means to be a lawful ruler in any sense. But this will become more problematic as we go down, because then you'll start to see it doesn't really feel like just war at all. So just cause. War only against oppression is what a lot of the Islamic scholars and what Al-Khattab was saying in the comments, where he said there's so many different standards and requirements for us Muslims to go to war. It's really tedious. We have such a good, rigorous war system. Well, here's the issue. While it says war only against oppression in those parts of the Quran, here's what Muhammad did. Offensive wars like the Battle of Khaybar against Jewish tribes with unclear provocation. Now, this is the difficult part for Muslims. So it says war only against oppression in the Quran, but then not only is Muhammad going out starting unprovoked attacks like the Battle of Khaybar, but Allah himself in Quran 9:29 says, fight those who do not believe, even if they've made no aggression. Well, if you can only have a war only against oppression, but then Allah also commands, fight those who do not believe, even if they've made no aggression, then it seems like Allah has opposite commands. But if Allah has essentially opposite commands about war, and there's no time mark for this necessarily, then it seems like he has essentially either different standards for Muhammad, who is a perfect example for all mankind, than he does for everybody else in the Quran. But if he commands everyone to follow Muhammad and what he did, but then also commands people to follow the Quran, which has opposite explanations about right and wrong from what Muhammad did, then that means that Muslims actually have no legitimate sense of morality that they can follow in a consistent way. If they follow Muhammad's actions, they go against a great deal of the Quran. If they follow the Quran, they're not able to follow Muhammad as the perfect example that they're commanded to in the Quran. Ergo, there's no way for a Muslim to have a legitimate sense of moral authority or consistency, which makes Islam collapse on any form of moral argumentation. And this just gets worse and worse. It was same with right intention. Some Muslims will say, fight for Allah's cause, not gain, right? I know some of the Muslims, even in the comments, were trying to say that. Well, here's the thing. Muhammad didn't really care so much for right intention. Quran 8:1-41 actually shows that Muhammad did care for gain and not just for Allah's cause. Portions war booty showing economic motive. Muhammad allowed spoils of war, even slavery, in Sahih Muslim 43:45. And fun fact, while one part of the Quran says fight for Allah's cause, not gain, Allah also gives this granted authority to Muhammad, 1/5 of all war booty, in the exact same passage of the Quran, number 8, Surah 8. So is it that Allah grants Muhammad 1/5 of all war booty, or is it fight for Allah's cause and not gain? This happens over and over. Again, this is bad because this means that Allah is eternally decreeing opposite things, because the Quran is the eternal word of Allah, right?
Now, before you continue,
yes,
upon the just cause section, yes, war only, that's one of it is an option. There are options for just cause, and one of them is war against oppression. But that's not just the only one.
That's right.
There are multiple, including going and taking and forcibly converting people, which is fine under Sharia.
That's right.
Now, your point about the war booty is also still applied today, because the caliph is supposed to be getting Mohammed's share, basically. He's supposed to have part of that war booty for himself. So there's an incentive for you to go out and fight. And again, we're not saying that in this it's an option for Muslims to go do it. In fact, when we go back to there, we will see that it's obligatory, and Allah himself steps in and says, if you don't go do it, you're not part of his favorites. It's only those who go and risk their lives in fighting for Allah that Allah cares about.
That's exactly right.
Everyone else is lesser to him.
Yes. And I think this chart really, what I'm trying to say with this chart is the second column, you know, the Islamic ideal. I think all of these Muslim liberal scholars and the way that liberal Muslims in the West interpret Islamic war is just wrong. The way that you've shown it is actually correct, because if they interpret it this way, the way that this column shows it, then Islam is technically impossible because Allah is eternally decreeing opposite things. If Allah is eternally decreeing opposite things, he has opposite wills, which means that Allah is metaphysically impossible, right?
Okay, so can I break in with a devil's advocate here a little bit and say that there is one condition for one thing to be done and then another condition for another thing to be done?
Sure. That the issue is that if you put conditions on the eternal speech of Allah, then you do actually make it so that Allah's speech is conditioned. And if Allah's speech is conditioned, then you make it sound like Allah is dependent on certain conditions, certain situations, certain contexts for his thoughts.
That's very bad.
Which is
very bad.
Which is what we just saw with the whole Ali Dawah versus God logic thing, right? Ali Dawah was accidentally admitting that Allah is dependent, and that's kind of what we see here. That those conditions would make the eternal speech of Allah dependent, which would be a big metaphysical issue for Muslims. But yeah, the sad part about this whole chart for this, before war issue is that this entire column is what liberal Muslims and liberal Muslim scholars will try to say. But the issue is that's just not what you actually see when it comes to Muhammad, who's the perfect example for Muslims. And that's also not even what the Quran itself consistently says, even in some of the same sections. And that's perhaps the most embarrassing part here, is that just over and over, what the Quran says is in contradiction with what the Quran says later on. And it's also in contradiction with what Muhammad is doing. And so what are Muslims supposed to do? Follow the Quran or follow Muhammad?
That's a good question. So each one of these, it does seem like when in the West, one of these verses is taken out in Islam and rhetoric in primarily majority Muslim countries, especially ones where Sharia is present. The other verses come out. You hear about jihad being a personal struggle here in the West, but elsewhere it's not. So all you have to do is just listen to what's being said outside the U.S. and you see how things are coming. So
yeah.
Oh yeah. So let's go ahead and go on. If you don't mind, can we go back to the Sharia?
Yes. Go right ahead.
Go back to Sharia.
That's the actual one.
So yeah. So again, this gives you guys the references here for this. And we have them there. So let's go down. So if we go on to war, and again, this kind of, they kind of blend together. Because Islam does not give you very clear. Now, it does say that it is not permissible to kill women or children unless they are fighting against the Muslims. Now, that's very vague as far as what qualifies for fighting, because earlier on it qualifies any Muslim who is participating in jihads, anyone that's providing a meal for someone who would then go fight, or anyone that would do something that would enable someone to help someone else go and fight. So it's like 3 or 4 times removed, you're fine. We also know that according to many of the hadith, Whenever Muhammad's companions had killed women and children in a night raid, Muhammad didn't condemn them for that. He just said they're of them. So they would be included. Hey, they were enabling them. Therefore, go ahead and do it. Now, it is... Okay,
Do you want to get back to this? Sorry.
It is... So it's permissible, not supposed to be permissible to kill women and children unless they're fighting against the Muslims, nor is it permissible to kill animals unless they are being ridden into battle against Muslims, so like horses that they're taking into Muslims, or if killing them would help defeat the enemy. So
okay.
If it would inconvenience the opponent in any way, shape, or form, it is permissible. It is also permissible to kill old men. This is referring to men over the age of 40 and monks. They are fair game. Again, the references are available there. So
Mohammed didn't really care for that one too much.
Which one?
Yeah, he didn't really care for the whole like woman and children thing. You're right.
He wanted them not to be killed because they wanted them to be captured, because then you could sell them as war booty.
Yeah.
And we see that over and over again in the Islamic sources, Muhammad taking women and children and selling them as slaves. You can't really sell dead people too well.
Yeah, that's true.
Really
That's true.
So
Not a
if
good
they're
market.
alive, then it's much easier. It is unlawful to kill non-Muslims to whom a Muslim has given his guarantee of protection. So it's you don't kill the non-Muslims unless the non-Muslim violates it in any way, shape, or form, or the Muslim doesn't have the proper authority to give it, and it must be extremely limited to a certain set of people that then you cannot harm temporarily. Of course, if they're deemed as spies, they're fair game. So that would be as far as protection goes. You can lie and say you're protecting them. If they are spies, then you're fine to kill them. So whatever qualifies as spies, that's kind of unspecified. So whoever enters, now this is an interesting one. So this is from 09.12. Whoever enters Islam before being captured. So before they are captured in battle, may not be killed, or his property confiscated, or his young children taken as captives. So if you convert, then you're perfectly fine. Before we capture you. So if you just convert to Islam, you're perfectly fine. You're completely protected from us. There's no compulsion in religion except for when there is.
Well, Let's make some comments here before we keep on going. So I want to put a little bit of history as we go through to show that this is something that's not just, it is written, it is also something that has been followed, and what these is being discussed. In the golden age of Islam in Al-Andalus, you see these as being just a matter of practice. Conversion is necessary. If you do convert, then you no longer you fall under the protection of Islam. You no longer have to pay the jizya. You no longer or can be humiliated like you are. The protections that apply in their rules for Muslims then can apply to you. So there is a real push for this to happen. So this is what happens after war, but also during war too. We see both being taken, both cases. Yep.
And now this is, again, the rules we're going through here is Sharia. This is what is applied in any Muslim nation that says they follow Sharia. These are the rules that they have to go by. So if you say, oh, well, we should have Sharia here, or we definitely shouldn't ban it here, this is what you guys are promoting. This is what's actually here. It's not just a dietary restriction, as some Muslims would like to try to claim. There's a lot more to it.
Some people would say it's just a struggle, right? So,
Yeah. Nope. There are in the actual book, which is the again handbook to Sharia, the Reliance of the Traveler. There are over 1,000 pages in that, documenting every part of life, and some they refuse to translate. I wonder why.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like the whole slavery section, they don't want to translate how they trade slaves. Huh. That's interesting. They said, well, it's not applicable right now.
Wait, I want to make a comment about this, the slavery issue. Islam is very much, no, that's not going to happen. They are, if you look at the history of Islam, how much is slavery actually involved in the different countries that are there? When you have the progression of Islam and country becomes more Islamic, do you see more slavery in Islamic states than you do in maybe like Western states, non-Muslim states?
The answer is you definitely see an increase. In fact, the only nations to abolish slavery without outside pressure have been non-Muslim nations. All Muslim nations have kept it. And even when it is outlawed on the books, they still appeal to Sharia, which allows it. So they still have underground markets that still to today are selling slaves.
More Africans went in the Eastern slave trade than they did in the West. But the main reason why you do not see more Africans in Arabia, in modern day Turkey and so forth, that area, is because the males were generally castrated before they went.
Snippy.
That's right.
So that's why we don't see that, and then the women were forced into sex slavery, which we'll see later on. And if they became pregnant, since they're black and they're less human in Islam, their children were immediately killed and executed. And they were just continued to be forced into sex slavery.
Religion of peace.
So, and in fact, that goes into 0913. Perfect time to pull that one up, John, because it talks about this. When a child or woman is taken captive, they become slaves, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. So that applies why you don't want to kill them, because then you don't have slaves. Here you go. By the fact of capture. And the woman's previous marriage is immediately annulled. So boom, no more marriage. You are fair game to any Muslim who wants to have you right there. Now, you might have to wait the Iddah, but other than that, she is up for grabs. Iddah is the time period after marriage. If you divorce a woman, then you have to wait the Iddah. And there's Iddahs even for prepubescent children in Islam, because, do the math on that one. When an adult male is taken captive, so this is the flip side, when an adult male is taken captive, the caliph considers the and.
I'm guessing the case.
The case,
And decides.
Because sometimes whenever it's coming over, it doesn't go over quite right. Decides between the prisoner's death, slavery, release without paying anything, or ransoming himself in exchange for money or for a Muslim captive held by the enemy. If the prisoner becomes a Muslim before the caliph chooses any of the four alternatives, so he cannot be killed, any of the other four alternatives are fine. Then he may not be killed, and one of the three alternatives can be chosen.
So slavery, release without paying, or ransoming himself in exchange for money, or a Muslim captive.
Yes, and we see this throughout Islamic history. This is a very common practice throughout Islam. So it is permissible in jihad to cut down the enemy's trees and destroy their dwellings. This is something that a lot of Muslims will go around and say, see, you can't harm their animals, you can't harm any sort of trees. And I'm like, that's not what Sharia says at all. In fact, you can, if you think it would harm them, you can kill their animals, you can destroy their trees, you can destroy their dwellings. There's no requirement on that. Additionally, even when you come to truces, they are permissible but not obligatory. You do not have to have them. In fact, there's strict requirements for a Muslim nation to say, okay, we're going to stop jihad and we're going to have peace now with non-believers. It is only for the benefit of the Muslims. If you can no longer push, you were running out of people, okay, we can have a truce while you build up to again push again. So it's only a stopgap to stop them from killing you completely. If you're in danger, you can make truce with them to hold their hand off while you're building up.
And we've seen this with the methods in Saladin.
Oh, yeah.
His method of pulling back, regroup, and hitting again under truce that could be broken.
Absolutely. Now, Quran 47:35 tells Muslims, do not be faint-hearted and call for peace when it is you who are the uppermost. So if you have an upper hand, you don't give peace. You continue. If you have strength, continue to push. Continue to do jihad. Do not be faint-hearted. So
we need to look at
that's actually wild. Now, about that slavery, just so we can stick with that, because you talked about that for a little bit. Was Islamic slavery just, more like indentured servitude? Was it more, just kind of kind? They really treated these people the same? Because some of the Muslims in the comments say that really, when you get down to it, there's so many different words for slave in Arabic, and so it's kind of complicated. So I'm sure this is definitely just indentured servitude, right? What they did to these people throughout Islamic history.
Actually, according to Sharia, is very proud that no, you do not have indentured servitudes. Indentured servitude. You cannot get them in any other way but to go out and take them by force. That's the only way, and that is chattel slavery. That's what we see later on that Europeans started adopting, was the Islamic way of doing slave trading. So, yeah, if there's Muslims in the chat that are saying this, no, sorry to burst your bubble, but no, Islam is very pro-slavery. It has promoted it. Slavery was before it, don't get me wrong. Slavery existed long before Islam.
Yep, true.
Ever since one man can own another, it's always been around. Islam just raised it up to industrial level and put it on the global scale. And as far as what you're referring to as the Western slave trade versus the Islamic slave trade, the slaves that went to America had about a 10% fatality rate coming to the Americas, and that's the entire Americas area. So coming across, 1 out of 10 would die. Going to Arabia, 1 out of 10 would live.
Oh my goodness, 90% death rate?
90% death rate. Because of there's the forced march across the desert.
Sahara. Yep.
The Sahara just annihilated most of the slaves that went across it. And it was a continuous line of slaves going.
Wow.
All in all, there's a small fraction that went to the west that did not go to the east. And the numbers dwarf.
Well, you could just look at ethnicity right now in these different regions, and you're looking at the evidence.
That's true. There's a very small number of people with strict predominant African ancestry.
David, did you want to respond to this section? We're looking at this. This is the rules governing during war. So I will take this off and I will put yours on.
Sure thing. Let me add mine back real quick.
Yes, if you could. And keep an eye on here if you want to bring anything up in the meantime.
So you want to bring yours up?
Yes. Let me see if I can add mine. There we go. So this is justice in war, proportionality. And oddly enough, it's so funny. A lot of the Muslims in the comments are saying the exact things that you see in the left leaning or more liberal theological Muslims. This kind of column right here. So it's funny that they're just kind of echoing it before I even put it on the screen. That's hilarious. But then again, I guess that's not new to any of us. So that's I'm not a prophet. though I definitely know the future better than Muhammad did.
But that's really what's being taught here in the West, correct?
Yes. Oh, yes. These are the common talking points we hear. And sadly, to be fair to all the Muslims in the comments, these are the things that they're going to hear because they haven't studied the, Sharia as deeply as we obviously see the Reliance of the Traveler showing. And so a lot of people are actually actively in the comments disagreeing with Reliance of the Traveler, actively disagreeing with the predominant majority number of scholars throughout Islamic history. They're actively disagreeing with the Quranic teaching, and they're actively disagreeing with the example set by the Prophet Muhammad in their own refutations of what we're saying, which is ironic because all we're doing is just explaining Islamic belief, Quranic teaching, and hadiths. In either case, while they all actively reject their religion, which I think is a good thing, by the way. Don't get confused, any Muslims in the comments. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to reject your religion. I just think you should know that you're doing it, okay? Understand, I just think you should know that you're doing it. That way you can come to the perfect King and Savior, Lord Jesus Christ. So on to proportionality. They often say don't transgress limits for proportionality in war, but here's what we see from Muhammad. And why do I have the example of Muhammad? Because again, Muslims are told that Muhammad is a perfect example for all mankind. Was it for all time for all mankind? Is that the correct teaching?
Yes, he is the code of conduct for all mankind. A perfect template for every Muslim to be like.
There we go. So what I'm doing is I'm purposefully showing what we see with Muhammad's actions or with what he allowed people to do, and showing that that's a perfect moral example, but showing how the Quran contradicts what Muhammad did. And that's the thing that the Muslims are trying to do when they try to go for the more peaceful interpretation. So the number one, the Quran is contradicting itself in many cases, because again, this is all the eternal mind of Allah, which means Allah has contradictory affirmations about morality, which means that moral epistemology in Islam is essentially impossible. Please understand, Muslims, your moral epistemology is essentially impossible. You might as well fall down to something more akin to like moral anti-realism, that morality doesn't actually exist and it's just random junk Allah makes up on the spot, which is correct because in the Quran, at some points he says it's wrong to bow down to anyone else in a type of sujood manner, but then at a different point he commands the angels and Iblis to bow down to Adam, right? So obviously we know that this is the case, but in either case,
David, can I ask you a question first before you?
Yes, go ahead.
So just for clarity, you're not making a personal attack here. You're making a philosophical distinction,
yes,
right? And you're looking at what's written and saying, this does not make sense. These are not coming together. Yes. If you want to have integrity and truth, it's not here.
Exactly. What I'm saying is that there's no moral epistemology. There's no way to know truth about morality. Again, what are you supposed to do? Follow the Quran or follow the example of Muhammad? Well, many Muslims would say, well, they're one and the same. What we're showing you is evidence that that's simply not the case, guys, okay? Or ladies, whoever's watching. It's just simply not the case. And you can be upset and do whatever you want and say that I'm spouting out rubbish like some people are saying right now. But notice how there's no actual response to what I'm saying.
Nope.
There's no intellectual engagement. And guys, I'm telling you, if you want Islam to look good, start learning to intellectually and philosophically engage with the claims and arguments being presented rather than simply trying to brush it off. That's not how someone who's trying to be intellectually honest deals with argumentation or challenging topics, okay? Just try to engage. We're reading from your sources. We're reading from your Islamic scholars and Islamic history. If you have an issue with it, hey, so do we, okay? We're actually in agreement on that. So don't feel like you're isolated. You're in the same boat as us. That's okay. That's okay. All right. So as we all come to see these contradictions, again, any Muslim could deal with the contradictions of saying that you should follow Muhammad and also follow the Quran when those have opposite moral categories. Don't transgress limits is what most Muslims today will say in the West and more liberalized areas, but more akin to what we see when it comes to what your brother in Christ was showing. Allah endorses massacre and plunder in various parts of the Quran, and Muhammad actually, we see siege and annihilation of Banu Qurayza, and this is from the proportionality section above, so if somebody wanted to do a citation check, Then you could Ibn Ashaq and Sunan Abu Dawud, 4390, Massacre of Banu Qurayza. Okay, a lot of people beheaded. So that's proportionality. Again,
now,
go
if I
ahead.
may, real quick. During that attack is also where Muhammad tortures a man to death over money. So he takes one of the Jews who are supposed to be guarding the Jewish money and store it. Now, this is all based upon Muhammad claiming that they violated some sort of treaty that never historically existed, according to every historical standard. It never existed. There's no writing of it. There's no actual evidence that this ever existed or this was agreed to. So he takes them, executed them en masse. This was a mass execution. He stripped them naked. Anyone that had pubic hair got executed as far as the boys go. And it was in a trench in Medina. He dug a trench in Medina and they were all executed there, one after the other as he went down. He also executed a woman as well, and his own father-in-law, well, future father-in-law, because he then took one of the women there as his actual wife later on. One of his many wives. Was that Mary the
Copt or somebody else? Was that Mary the Copt or was that somebody else? One of the ladies.
I think it's someone else. I don't think it was Mary the Copt.
Else. Wow, that's horrible.
So this sounds like ISIS.
Yes, ISIS would have followed very close to what Muhammad did to these Jews here based upon a fabricated treaty that only exists in Islamic sources that are found 200 years after the event occurred.
Wow. Sounds like they're trying to justify it after the fact.
It definitely would historically look like that. There's no way around it because I would expect to have seen something, and it's never directly quoted or written down saying this is exactly what it said. That doesn't exist either. So sorry, just wanted to point that out that Muhammad used torture for nothing more than to fulfill his greed.
Yeah.
And that's in the context of the part that's given, correct?
Yeah.
We're talking context here, guys. This is these verses here, an example of what's happened in Muhammad's life. He did this, and these are the verses that would align with that. And there's also others that don't, and so that's where the contradiction comes through.
So yes, so any of the Muslims who are in the chat yelling, saying, "Oh, you're not looking at the entire context. You're not looking at the entire." David S. is giving you a nice level. He's giving you the most beneficial interpretation of these sections. If you want to go to the context, it does not get better for you. It gets worse.
Yes.
Like, for example, the torturing of the man that's hidden behind the example there. Again, the reason why we give you references, I mean, David, you have got Sahih al-Bukhari 30:12 on there. They can look that up. They can look at the entire verse. They can look at all the references I've given out of Reliance of the Traveler and take a look at what the scholars actually say. And they can look at the Arabic, because if you do a quick Google search on it, you can find a free PDF online where you can verify everything that I said, considering 99% of it was a copy paste from Reliance of the Traveler. So it would have to match up. In fact, you can even see in one of my references, it translated as a 0 instead of an O.
Oh,
because when it copies over, sometimes it doesn't get it quite right.
Yeah.
So,
just
want to point that out.
We're trying, guys. Like all the Muslims in the comments, we are trying. And by the way, especially like specifically on my end, mine is multifaceted. With each point, I'm trying to say that you have a philosophical and theological issue in Islam, right? So, even if we go to civilian protection, I try to be pretty charitable here. So, no killing of women and children. We also saw what your brother in Christ was showing before. Hadith, they are of them. And allows killing women and children at night if unintentional. Although it seems like there's other hadith that show that, it's better to kind of keep them alive. But if it's unintentional, well, what are you going to do about it, right? Maybe they were just a little too hopped up on Zamzam water, so they started to start slashing and slicing. Who knows? But then you go to this. Quran 17:33 prohibits unjust killing, but Quran 9:123 commands fighting even those near you. And guys, here's the issue. And people say that there's like very basic and simple historical context, but also the way the Quran was pieced together off of, jawbones and leaves and whatever else, it's kind of hard to figure out the exact historical context for a lot of this. And from a theological point of view, all of this is the eternal speech of Allah. So then technically, from a theological perspective, there is no context. So this is just an essential state of the moral teaching of Allah. But in either case, whatever, right?
Can I jump in real quick? Because I know
Yes.
you're chomping at the bit, and you're doing great, David. This is fantastic at laying this out. It's really good. Another note about that context: you can do that with the Bible, because the Bible is okay. The book of Psalms may be an exception to that. The book of Proverbs may be an exception to that, because you don't, and those are poetic books. You don't have an actual historical context for a lot of those. Sometimes you do, like what happened David after Bathsheba. There's an example of context there. But in most cases, you have a context in which these are given. What Jesus is doing, what he says, it's all historical, and it's looked at from four different points of view. So the Bible has that, but the Quran does not.
Exactly.
So, or very little context.
Yeah.
And again, sorry, pull up one comment here. I know you answered them. Yes, it is Sahih. It is Sahih Hadith. And on top of that, this is in line with the ruling of the Muslim scholars as outlined in Sharia, which we've already demonstrated. So nothing David is saying here about it, what it actually says, is outside of what Sharia states.
We're
itself,
trying
to Muslim scholars state.
Yeah, we're
This
giving
kind of
this our
funny.
best shot here, guys. This is not that we're not trying to dredge anything. This, we're looking at what it is and saying, okay, where does this fit in? Like what David did here with civilian protection. Where does all this fit in?
You know what? Just pull up the next comment from Al-Khattab, because I think that's a good example. That the next
intellectual.
So, just so you guys know, for all the other Muslims in chat, because just because Al-Khattab did this didn't mean that all the other Muslims did, okay? This is just an example, though, of how you should not engage, right? So let's say I can't say Sahih al-Bukhari right. Let's just say that I'm saying it incorrect. Does that change the fact that Sahih al-Bukhari strictly states this and it is a Sahih hadith? No,
Nope.
It does not. My pronunciation of something doesn't change the argument, right? This is an example of someone who's not willing to intellectually engage and instead is trying to pull at random points. Because as a matter of fact, I have seen very few, if any, Muslims in the comments actually engage with a single Quranic, hadith, or philosophical, or theological, or metaphysical comment I've made. All they're saying is, you're not a scholar. Well, fun fact, if you look at what your brother in Christ has presented, that's the consensus of the scholarly understanding of Sharia per the original source, Reliance of the Traveler. I'm presenting the consistent theological beliefs of Muslim scholars as it regards to or relates to the immutability of Allah per his eternal speech, which is necessarily adherent within the Quran. Ergo, all moral precepts and moral epistemology flows from the Quran because it's the mind of Allah, from which Muslims believe they get their sense of morality. But if the Quran has opposing standards of morality, then that means that the mind of Allah has eternally opposed standards of morality, which means you can't say anything is essentially good or essentially evil because it's all just a wash, okay? In either case.
I just want to point out one more thing. He also talks about the hadith science being more than scholars. Dude, it's all based off the scholars. They're literally, the scholars are the hadith source.
Yeah.
They're the ones who give the grades on the hadith based upon their research. And then they're the ones I go to and I point to saying, hey, they're saying this is sahih. So according to them, this is reliable. So the Quran, the Islam must say that this is reliable then, because I get pointed by a lot of Muslims that have to go to the scholars. So I went to the scholars. You can't complain about it if I go to the scholars and they say things you don't like.
Yeah.
In fact, that right there is apostasy.
Yeah.
If you were to reject their rulings, again, according to Sharia, that would be 7.0. So 07.0 talks about apostasy in Islam. And one of the conditions is that you doubt any part of the ruling of the council, i.e. Sharia.
Yep. And again, all you got to do is just engage. Just engage. It'd be kind of like saying that, the Hadith science is more than the scholars. It's like saying that Niels Bohr's model of the atom is more than what Niels Bohr predicted and explained. It's like, no, Niels Bohr's model of the atom was the way it was because Niels Bohr made it, right? You can't just say Niels Bohr's model of the atom was more than what Niels Bohr thought. Nope. That was his model. The atom was more than what Niels Bohr thought, but not his model of it. So, just doesn't really make too much sense to make that claim.
So another thing that he had here that I just kind of laugh at, he's made fun of the way that you were saying it, but at the same time, he said science more than scholars. It's than, THAN.
See, I'm not picky about that. I give the benefit of the doubt. And yes, he even misspelled hadith.
Oh, dang.
It doesn't have two E's. But I'm not nitpicky like that because I look at what you're actually saying.
Right.
And I value what you're actually saying, regardless of any small mistakes, being that maybe English is your second language. So I want to engage you regardless of those simple little mistakes.
Right. True.
Please give us the same benefit.
That's right. Same here, forbade mutilation from the Hadith, and that's at least what Muslims will say. But then what we see with Muhammad, ordered mutilation of Quraysh captives in some cases from Ibn Ashaq, page 387, and also the Quran. I will cast terror, strike their necks and fingertips. Quran 8, verse 12. So obviously, the Muslims who try to say, yeah, we follow the Hadiths. If Hadith says weak, then it's usually not followed. That's weird because the Quran is actually more, strong than the Hadith. And if the Quran says, I will cast terror, strike their necks and fingertips, I feel like that would overrun any Hadith that would say this. But in either case.
Well, sometimes Hadith override the Quran. It's really on need for need basis. After all, how many times do Muslims pray a day? That's nowhere within the Quran. That's found within the Hadith. If you look at the Quran, then you have 3 to 4 times a day. It's something that's definitely fabricated later on. And again, who's the one saying the Hadith are weak? Dude,
not us.
It would be the Muslim scholars who you're saying the science of Hadith are more than what the Muslim scholars say. Well, they're the ones saying that is weak. So, and again, I'm only using what they say is strong. And so is David. He has pulled up nothing that's not Sahih.
And even if, by the way, even if there was something on here that wasn't Sahih, fun fact, according to many academic scholars who are finally getting into the critical analysis of quote unquote Hadith science that are outside of Islam, and you see this with some of the people who spoke about the holes in the narrative, turns out a lot of scholars actually recognize what Muslims call as weak Hadiths as actually more likely to be true Hadiths because it seems as though they're trying to hide less. And the fact that this has been transmitted seems like it actually might have been a real story. While in some of the Hadiths that are, considered strong, they have questions to think if it was carried on just because it might have made something seem, stronger or perhaps more useful for Islam at a certain time. So there are distinctions in Quran science, and I wouldn't say Quran science is a very strong science quite yet. For now, that's what I would say. Quran science is not as clear as it seems, and so but let's say this one, like Sahih Muslim, right? We know for a fact that's Sahih.
Yep,
we know for a fact that's Sahih. Do not betray, right? Banu Nadir and Qurayza punished just by treaties, deception used in Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And here's the issue. That was permissible, but while Sahih Muslim says do not betray, Quran 858, if you fear betrayal, throw back the treaty. So if you think that there might be betrayal at some point, just throw it back. Throw it back, right? Doesn't matter if you made a treaty, just get rid of it. Who cares about it, right? Again, this is more than just a confusing riddle to solve. There are philosophical and theological issues here that none of the Muslims in the comments seem to want to focus on. Even humane, prisoner of war treatment. Ransom or release prisoners is what we see from a lot of the more liberalized Western Muslims. Well, here we go. Sahih al-Bukhari. Wait a second. This was what al-Bukhari?
Sahih.
Oh, okay. Nice. Good to hear. Enslaved and ransomed captives, including women, and Safiya bint Huyai, taken as concubine. Oh my, that's interesting. Well, I thought we were supposed to ransom or release the prisoners. Oh, well. In either case, what we see from the Quran, Muhammad may take female captives as concubines per common understanding of Quran 3350. He may take female captives as concubines. Well, now, wait a second. Is this the perfect moral example of Islam?
I do got to correct you. It's not concubines, actually. It's sex slaves.
Oh, sex slaves.
Concubines is more generous.
I was trying to, again, with a lot of these, I was trying to be a lot more generous. So I was saying, okay, maybe there's some sort of like kind way to say this, but that is true. The majority of Muslim scholars throughout Islamic history would say that this is sex slaves, which is why it was permissible. But yes, so again, inconsistency. That's all I'm saying.
Just real quick, this is all in line with, again, what I just pulled out of Reliance of Travel Sharia. Is that, yes, for men, the caliph's the one who decides to either ransom him, enslave him, kill him, or trade him. So, yes, you can ransom or release prisoners, but it's only one small bit of it. There's more bits and pieces to it.
Yes.
For women, you go ahead and enslave because as soon as you capture them, they're automatically slaves of yours. And you can do with your property as you see fit. In Islam, if you have a Muslim slave, they have some rights, some protections. But if they are not a Muslim slave, if they are a Christian slave, you are fair. They are those your right hands possess, and you can do with them as you see fit. Their marriages are instantly annulled, and you can go ahead and use them and abuse them as you see fit. Men, then, if it's a man captured, need to make a decision on what is the most beneficial for the Ummah at that time.
Yeah. It's all pragmatic. A lot of the moral choices for Islam are just pragmatic. What will help Islam the most? Sadly, the Ummah. And of course, this whole, you can't even, just as you were mentioning before, brother in Christ, no burning crops or trees, right? People will quote Abu Bakr, right? They'll constantly quote Abu Bakr. No burning crops or trees. Yeah, you can sexually assault a woman, but don't burn crops or trees. Well, here's the issue. Fields and palm groves were burned at Banu Nadir, and we actually see this even in cited in Quran 59:5. So I guess Abu Bakr didn't really matter too much. And again, that's what we found. What you cut down, it was by Allah's permission. So when he says what you cut down, that's speaking to Muhammad. So we see Abu Bakr disagreeing with Muhammad about war practice. And it seems like a lot of Muslim scholars and Muslims will take Abu Bakr's word and try to make it sound much softer and sweeter. We won't even burn the crops or trees. They'll choose him over their prophet and their God. Strange. Again, just a lot of inconsistencies, both internally in terms of the Quran, externally Quran and Hadiths, because that's Muhammad and the Quran, and then theologically and philosophically, which again, not a single Muslim has tried to address it philosophically yet. I don't know why. I try so hard and Muslims never respond to the philosophical arguments. I've made at least hundreds at this point. They're on my channel, from beauty, from truth, from the knowledge of love, from the possibility of creation as a concept in the first place, from relationality, and no Muslims ever want to engage with that. And it's really silly.
Wow, you really can't in the end with Islam.
Okay, so do you want to do, we can look at after?
Yeah, I have after here, which is the shortest section because it is the most, I guess you call it liberal in a way. Liberal in the sense of the word as they get to do whatever they want. So we have this for you. Yeah, thank you. So again, you can see that this is straight from this should be an O, but it's not. So it's actually O10.1. O10 is dealing with war booty. So it's talking about war booty, what you do from it. Free man, Muslim, who has reached puberty and is sane is entitled to the spoils of battle. So anything in battle. When he participated in a battle to the end of it. So if you're in the battle to the end of it, now there are restrictions in you saying, okay, you can run. If you dropped your weapon, you don't have a way to fight, you can go ahead and retreat. There are some ways, but if you have a weapon and you are able-bodied, and the Muslims are not outnumbered. If you see the Muslims being outnumbered, you can get your butt out of there. If they're not outnumbered, you need to continue to fight. So the next section talks about, so this would be 10.2, as for personal booty. Anyone who, despite resistance, kills one of the enemy or effectively incapacitates him, so you can then take him as slave, risking his own life, thereby is entitled to whatever he can take from the enemy, basically meaning loot. He can loot the bodies of whoever he kills. He's allowed to do it. Now, as far as treatment of slaves, because that ends up being the main question, because if you're taken as a slave, okay, what's your treatment like? What are you actually going to do with it? Well, we know in many Muslim sources that you can beat your slaves, and you're told in other sources not to beat your wife as you would beat your slave and then have sex with her on the same night. So yes, by that you would be implied you can beat your slave. And you're not supposed to beat your wife as badly as you beat your slave, then when you beat your wife, whatever would apply to her would also apply to a slave. You're not to be asked why you beat your wives. No man is to be asked why.
Yep.
There are multiple Sahih Hadith all on that topic.
Tons.
And that then would apply to slaves. So if I'm beating a slave, no one is to ask question why. In Sunan Abi Dawud 21:55, it talks about Muhammad sending his men out. They capture a bunch of women slaves. They want to have intercourse with the women slaves. And Muhammad said, it's permissible for you. They are those your right hands possess. Just wait for their iddah. And they're in line. Their husbands were right there in front of them too. So, hey, their husbands are here. We don't want to have sex with them in front of their husbands. What do we do? Well, you just wait their time period and you're good to go.
That's wild.
To have them. So Sunan Abi Dawud 18:18, though, I don't hear quoted very much. And this is where Abu Bakr starts beating a slave in front of Muhammad. And Muhammad's reaction is not, why are you beating this man? It's not right that you are beating this man who is possessed by you, or you have the right to. No, his reaction is to make a joke about the man being beaten. That's what you see. And it's very clear. All Muhammad did was make the joke and smile. And there's two different references that both say the same thing. It's both references to Abi Dawud 18:18. So, and that's where I have it at the point. So those would be the sources that I could go to. Again, in Reliance of the Traveler, they have not translated the slave section. So, and I think it's only the only thing about slaves in there necessarily is how to release them and get the bounty for releasing them. Because if you release slaves, then you would be, you could get forgiveness for sins.
Yep, which is a good incentive, because a lot of Muslims use that the wrong way. It's a very good incentive to capture slaves in the first place, because then you could easily just release them to get some forgiveness on your end, right?
That's what it does. It ends up industrializing slavery, because you have to have slavery, because then there's an option of being able to free the slaves to get forgiveness for your sins. You see that with one of Muhammad's, I think it's daughters, that was wearing gold, and she was approached, and they're like, that's wrong. You can't do it anymore. And then she's like, oh, I didn't know. Okay. I release a slave for forgiveness for this. And it's like, okay, it's wiped clean, but you have to, in order to basically you get a get out of sin free card.
Mhm.
Wow.
You just need to make sure you have the money in order to buy a slave, in order to immediately release him, and that is the price of your sins, according to Islam.
So
So,
simple.
David, do you have a follow up there at the after war?
Yes, I can show that right here.
Okay, I'll put that up.
And that'll post, and there we go. So yes, this is after the war. Also a small section with this because there's just not many points to be discussed here. So that being said, though this is a small section because there's not many points, because as you said, for justice after war, there's not many points until the Enlightenment and more modern understandings of it. This is really interesting. So Muslims will say, in more like liberalistic or Western frameworks and areas, that it's peaceful rule post-war. Now, here's the issue. How do you define that? How do you define peaceful when you say peaceful rule post-war? Well, I'm guessing that Muslims have a very different definition of peace because they have a very different definition of perfect. For instance, to explain that point a little bit, when Muslims say that Muhammad is the perfect prophet of Islam, there is no greater man than him in all of history. They also, if they're being honest, recognize the Quran stating that Muhammad had to ask for forgiveness for his own sins, and Allah had to give him forgiveness for his sins past, present, and future. So if that's the case, then what is the word perfection actually meaning in Islam? If Allah, is wiping away all these sins, that means there were sins, right? And some Muslims will say, oh, well, Muhammad was just being humble. No, because if he was being humble, he would tell the truth, but be humble. This was a deception, which means he lied, which was a type of imperfection. In either case, I simply mean to say that words don't mean what they normally mean or logically mean in Islam, and I kind of question the notion of peace and peaceful rule. Perhaps they'll often apply this to Spain under Islamic rule, and I guarantee you, John, that you have a lot more to say about that than I would. So Muhammad's contradictory action often installed Islamic rule and tax systems, jizya, without local autonomy. Again, I was trying to be nice when I said tax systems. Could you
I'm
explain?
going to correct you on that one.
Thank you very much. I would try to be nice, but go ahead.
It's protection racket.
Yes.
It's so that we don't come kill you. You pay us extra money so we don't come kill you. Now, this can go anywhere up to even past 80 to 90% tax rate.
I'm sorry, one second.
Go ahead.
I saw one of the most insane comments. All right, this is the last time I'll mention Al-Kitab. Can you just bring up the men have needs comment real quick?
Which one was that one?
That's one of the most
right here.
Okay.
Men have needs.
Okay. I've read the context.
To rape women, men have needs, so they must.
Okay.
Or boys, little boys.
Or little boys.
We can do that.
And again, that's something that's commonly found too.
What the actual heck is going on here? No, well, they do. Oh, okay. No, you can't. Okay, maybe this is actually a good point. In Islam, you are taught to think a certain way, and it's really hard to imagine morality outside of that framework. So when someone like Al-Kitab, which I actually do, I thank the Lord Jesus that Al-Kitab is here tonight, because Al-Kitab is a really good example for us. In Islam, morality is very different from what it is in Christianity, right? So saying simply men have needs, and that's a justification for taking a woman and making sex slaves out of them or forcing them to become wives for you. No, I don't think you should say men have needs, because I don't know if you could say that a man having sex with a sex slave is a need at all. And so I'm sorry, but this has to be one of the most horrendous comments. This is why I actually said earlier, oh, Al-Kitab just proved me right. Remember earlier how I said Muslims have no moral epistemology, no way of truly knowing right from wrong? This has to be one of the most hilarious full circle moments. Al-Kitab just proved my point that I made about like 30 minutes ago or something, or maybe it was an hour ago, where I said Muslims have no specific moral epistemology, no way of knowing and discerning right from wrong in any consistent true sense. Stating men have needs as the foundation for your morality is, I'm sorry, just a type of hedonism. Hedonism is the approach to morality in which one associates pleasure with goodness and pain with evil, such that which causes personal pleasure for an individual in the egoist view of hedonism is equated to moral goodness, and that which causes personal pain for an egoist hedonist is equated to evil. So Al-Khattab just explained and summarized that in Islam, hedonism is the guiding moral principle. And here's the fun fact. Would any of us actually disagree with this?
No, I wouldn't disagree.
No, because that's what Muhammad did.
I was gonna say, they are being consistent, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
Again, I'm sorry, I gotta butt in because this is
Go
just
ahead. Go ahead.
So again, he has proven that he is not a Muslim, that he hates Islam.
Goodness.
Because again, he just violated Sharia again. Because his statement here is in direct contradiction to Sahih al-Bukhari 58:28 out of the mouth of Aisha herself, which said that there was no women. She has seen no women as abused as the believing women. The pagan women were better treated than the Muslim women were.
Oh,
Islam is a cancer to humanity, specifically and most egregiously against those who follow it. So they suffer the most, undoubtedly.
goodness.
But again, you violated a Sahih Hadith. You contradicted a Sahih Hadith by this comment, bud. Come on.
Good point.
Do you read your own sources before making these comments? Because come on, man.
That's insane. And it really was. That's upsetting, guys. Like Muslims, back when I said that, there's certain things I assumed were going to happen. And I said, but I'm not actually a prophet. Fun fact, you walked right into that. You showed that it's full circle. You showed that you have no moral epistemology, no way of knowing correctly right from wrong. Because you spend half the comment section trying to argue, well, this didn't happen, and then you change your mind and say, well, it did happen, and it's a good thing. Why? Because men have needs. Like, what the heck are you talking about?
Sorry, one more.
Oh yeah, go ahead. What happened?
Nope, wrong on all fronts. In fact, this is even the common objection to Quran 9:29. Oh my gosh, dude, do you know history at all? Come on, you need to study history in order to make these sort of claims. Because the Byzantine Empire never invaded Muslim lands. Yeah. They never went to attack Islam. Islam attacked them.
Yeah.
Even after it was after Muhammad's death. So all of the Quran verses, according to your concept, would have been revealed beforehand. Now, the common one is saying that this is related to a treaty that was broken, which again didn't exist. And no, it's actually not according to the Muslim scholars, which I've already quoted previously. If you look at Quran 9:30, you find out the reason, because it defines it right afterwards, is because because Jews believe that Ezra is the son of Allah, which never happened in history. There's a contradiction within the Quran right there. And again, that's applying it to all Jews. And then in the same way, Christians call the Messiah the son of Allah. Again, it is specifically commanding you to wage jihad based upon what we believe, and only based upon that. There's no other reason needed.
So that's the context for 929.
What I gave was context for 929.
Right? We were talking about context earlier.
Yep.
There you
go. The more you look into context, the worse it gets for Islam. And again, the Byzantine Empire was way too busy waging war against the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire at the time. They did not care about some little nobody in the middle of the desert where they specifically stayed away. They stayed away long before Muhammad. They didn't have any interest in the barren lands down there. They didn't care. They didn't try to conquer it beforehand. Now, you're trying to claim that that is related to the Byzantine Empire, which is... Come on, dude.
Okay.
That's so sad. For someone who mentioned context, that's just upsetting. Sorry, your brother in Christ. I did interrupt you before. Can you explain to me why I was being not just too charitable, but technically incorrect when I said tax systems, jizya?
Because jizya isn't a tax system. You have under Sharia, you would still have the normal taxes that would be applied to the Muslims would be applied to the non-Muslims. And on top of that, you have the protection money, which is what the jizya is, which is say, hey, we won't kill you if you pay it. You know, you have an awfully nice shop here. It would be an utter shame if something were to happen.
You need to say that
it.
with a Boston accent. That'd be terrible if something were to happen to it.
Hey, what's the big idea?
There you go.
You want someone to break your windows? Hey, we'll protect you for a little bit of jizya. Come on.
Yep, and
We're
that's what
killing
it ends up
you.
being.
It was also a humiliating thing. It was subjugation. It wasn't just you send your check to the IRS. There was a whole process that went with it.
Yep, it was humiliation. In fact, that's what Quran 929 says. It says that they must give jizya willingly while being humiliated, while being humbled, while being submitted. Basically, hey, you're a second-class citizen. You're not worth our time. Pay us money or you will be in the dirt, just the same. Now, something else, according to Sharia about jizya, is it has an expiration date. There's a time that jizya will no longer be accepted. And that is at the coming, according to Islam, at the coming of Jesus.
That's right.
Back. At that point, you either convert or you die. Jizya is just a protection money that you're paying for now. And it's not even a 100% guarantee.
That's so upsetting. Yeah, there's no peaceful rule post-war if you refuse to pay their ridiculous protection money taxes. Well, too bad. Now, just before I go into the accountability and reconciliation on this whole reconstruction thing, peaceful rule post-war and all that, actually, no. Here, I'll go to accountability and reconciliation because I want to ask John a question or two about the reconciliation part. Because I think John will be the most apt to answer that. So, accountability. Punish war crimes is what we hear from more liberal Islamic scholars and some of the Western Islamic scholars in liberal academic contexts. That's what they'll say. Here's the issue. No punishment recorded for war crimes committed by Muslim forces. Now, I recorded a comment that somebody had said earlier in the live stream where they said no Muslim army had ever done a preemptive battle. And so they were trying to make it sound like, you know, there's no preemptive battle, there's no war crimes, therefore it's totally okay. Fun fact, that's just straight up not true. The Battle of Tabuk in 630 AD was a preemptive campaign. Okay. The Banu Mustalik raid in 627 AD, campaign against the Banu Qurayza that we literally have been talking about over and over and over this entire time. Most of, like, all of the historical information shows that was clearly a preemptive attack by the Muslims and early caliphate conquests post Muhammad 632 to 750 AD. So obviously from all measurements and standards, there are preemptive attacks. Now onto the accountability. Again, Quran states something pretty important. Quran 940, Allah supported him. You did not slay them, but Allah slew them. Well, if Allah is the one slaying, then is there need for any type of punishment? Of course not, because nobody punishes Allah. So this whole notion of punishing war crimes, no. That's not what happens when Muslim forces are the ones who did it, because they can't see their work as something that was wrong because Allah works through them. And if Allah works through them to slay people, then there's no legitimate sense in which you can say that it was the Muslims' fault. It was Allah's fault. But no fault is thrown upon Allah. Therefore, there's no need to punish war crimes because Allah does things that are good, apparently. And finally, reconciliation. They would say peace with non-hostile peoples. Peace. That's what all of us Muslims throughout history want. Just peace with non-hostile peoples. What does non-hostile mean? Well, Muslims get to define that. And basically, it could even be being hostile to the faith, which means not being a part of the faith. But let's go on to that. Forced conversions or humiliating jizya taxation. Jewish tribes expelled or executed. Interesting. Interesting. That doesn't really sound like peace with non-hostile peoples. Well, that's because they don't take hostility the way that you and I do. Anyone who disagrees with you, you could say that's a type of hostility. Not in a violent sense, but in the I'm afraid to get my feelings hurt because I can't defend my religion sense. And then finally, Quran 928. Again, mushrikun are unclean. Do not let them approach the mosque, which is where we get Quran 929 right there. Forced conversions and humiliating jizya taxation. Again, along with there being the issues with the Hadith. All of these, by the way, are Quranic in this case, which means now you have something really difficult to deal with Muslims. In the Quran, we have opposite claims that are coming from the eternal speech / eternal mind of Allah, which means Allah's mind is eternally giving opposite moral declarations. You could say that there are before and afters, but they're not in Allah, because Allah, according to the standard Islamic narrative about theological considerations, Allah is outside of time, which means there are no befores and afters. So Allah has not at one point thought this is a good thing, and at another point thought this was a bad thing. Allah has eternally held two opposite moral facts, which means that Allah has eternal opposite wills, eternal opposite desires, eternally opposite moral claims. Ergo, there is no sense in which you could say that morality is rooted in a consistent way in Allah, that Allah is unchanging, because he apparently has eternally, constantly opposed wills, right? Which means that Allah actually is also not one anymore. Fun fact, Muslims, you say that he's one, Tawheed. No, he's not. He actually has a multiplicity of wills that are opposed. How do we know that? Because the Quran has a multiplicity of statements that are in opposition. Ergo, there are multiple parts to Allah, which are his multiple opposite desires, which means that Allah is not Tawheed. He is not unified. He is not one, but he is multiple in wills, desires, moral claims, and moral facts, etc. Ergo, Tawheed is false. Ergo, and finally, Islam is wrong and impossible. So I would love to see any Muslim engage with that in the slightest in the live stream. And they're not going to do that, though. And
I gotta say, don't hold your breath, because
I know.
So just real quick, I do want to add one thing to this. Another aspect of this, and we pointed it out in general, but I want to really crack down on it, is that no place has ever existed to Muslims who peacefully took it over. There's always been some sort of force involved. Even if you look at...
Wait. What about Mecca?
Well, let's start with Medina first.
Medina. What about Medina?
Medina, Muhammad was invited in as one of the many leaders in Medina. And then after the Battle of the Trench, he turned on all the other leaders, had them executed, and took it.
Muhammad?
Basically. Yep.
What? He turned on people? No way.
Well, that was the tribe that you were talking about.
That's right.
They were one of the leaders in it. And they fled because they realized Muhammad's coming after them. So they fled to their fortress and said, just go away and we'll leave you be. Just don't leave. You guys go away. We'll be fine. And Muhammad said, no, either you convert or we will kill you. And then there was the mass genocide. He did that with multiple Jewish tribes that were all wiped out. So it was either forcibly converted. After that, he was the sole power in Medina. And then after that, he went to Mecca, and with an army of 10,000, as I'm told, and they immediately surrendered and converted to Islam. And then he proceeded to immediately deface all the idols in Mecca, the religious icons of other religions. He proceeded to disrespect those. Again, I don't have an issue with that. But for some reason, Muslims seem to have an issue with people disrespecting false religions' idols.
Look at that.
So after that, he continued to raid and pillage. And there's hadith that talk about him putting entire cities, if memory serves, to the sword, or at least raiding them and attacking them if he didn't hear the Adhan in the morning. If he didn't hear the call to prayer, okay, they're not Muslim, take them out. Again, specifically because they weren't Muslim. That's the only qualifying purpose on those attacks that Muhammad did. And again, he eventually passed away due to poisoning at Khaybar, due to his own stupidity, and died as a false prophet, according to his own testimony. And then Abu Bakr, right after him, began to attack the Christians of the Byzantine Empire and the pagans of the Persian Empire, and leading jihad against them, referring to the same verses that Sharia calls upon. So what we're saying is consistent with the sources for allegedly 1,400 years, as Muslims say.
Now, wait a second. That's confusing because all these Muslim scholars in the comment section are making it sound like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're making stuff up, even though we quoted the Quran, the Hadiths, Reliance of the Traveler, Sharia understandings of the Reliance of the Traveler. In either case. And, there was one point I had to specifically ask John about. When it comes to peace with non-hostile peoples, people often bring up in Islamic discussions, they talk about this paradise in this far-off land called Spain, more properly called Al-Andalus. Is there, for those uninitiated, from the beautiful, clearly Edenic place known as Al-Andalus, right, of Spain under Muslim rule, is there any example of this peace with non-hostile peoples that we hear, this rich, incredible utopia that Muslims established in Spain? Is that really how history presents it?
No, there was so it started off with an invasion in 711. Might have been invited in by one kingdom to say, "Hey, I need help against my enemy. Come in here as mercenaries," and they didn't stop. They kept going, pushed them all the way back, and there's pillaging, murder, rape, everything. And talking about scorched earth policy, it was also applied there. So the land was taken and stopped only by Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours in across the Pyrenees when they broke over and faced him in France, or the Franks at the time. And so it was a continual battle over and over for the next 800 years to push the invaders back. And so the Golden Age also included a large amount of slavery. So, you could put that there too. In fact, in my book, the Healing Stone, there is a point where they are captive by a prince, Almohad prince, and he says, "Look at this beautiful land we have and all the beautiful slaves that are here." So this is all background for what that is. It was not peace and harmony. It was not a place of science and innovation, as what's often said. The translators that they had were mostly Christian and Jewish translators.
Whoa.
So, and there was also periods of great hypocrisy that happened during when you had the fall of the Umayyad dynasty, and they had broken up into Taifa kingdoms. They got soft, and until there was a resurgence of Islam under the Almoravids, and then again they got soft, and the Almohads came in. But then by that time, it had all fallen apart. So,
wow, that doesn't sound like peaceful coexistence of non-hostile people.
It was continual battle back and forth.
Goodness. Well, now this is so confusing because all the scholars in the comments, they've made it pretty clear that Islam is a religion of peace, except for when men have needs, then peace goes out the window. I guess men have a different thing on their minds at that point. So, yeah, that helps a lot. That helps a lot. I appreciate that. Wow, that's something.
I think you guys have really. I think we've done a pretty good job. This is something that would take a lot of work because it's not. I don't think it's as readily evident what a just war would be in Islam. You can look. You guys have great calling up the sources like you have. And these are reliable Islamic sources. I don't think anybody can debate that.
Even in the chat, they're trying to as much as they can, which is they're all weak, except for whenever I pull up the actual scholars' readings on it, then they can't actually do anything about it. And they just say,
I think those are
you don't know anything.
The two primary arguments that are given: weak and no context.
Yeah, or you don't speak Arabic.
It's so worse.
It really was beyond the scope of what we're trying to do tonight because it's already gone long. But to say that each one of these needs to be studied with deep introspection on each one, we don't have the time to do all that. Plus, it pretty much is evident this is how these are preached. So I don't know if there's any other argument that can be given for it. This is how this would be applied. This is the version of a just war theory in Islam, as far as we can tell.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's
So
true.
again, for James, who decided to join late and then whine the entire time that we're not giving any sources at all, even though we literally gave books full of sources. If you're lazy but joins late, but just rewind.
How
There-
dare you not present all your sources at the moment that I log in?
And on top of that, I got pulled it. Sorry, Ottomans. He wants to go to the Ottomans as an example.
Now do one on how the Ottomans saved.
Again,
No.
I think these Jews.
Why is
Read it
it
exactly how it says. Now, do you want to
So
how the Ottomans saved Druze from
Jews from Christian persecution?
Christian
Well,
persecution?
First of all, you do know what the Ottomans did, right? Didn't they? What did they do to the young boys? What did they do to young boys? Because you got.
Shall we talk about?
This is who he's pulling up as an example.
Shall we talk about the harems and the janissaries?
The
Yes.
Janissaries. What are Janissaries?
Yes,
They
please do.
are the young Christian men who are taken as tribute from Christian nations, sexually abused by the Ottomans. Again, the people you're pulling up as an example, as a moral example, trained to kill and then sent back to their families in order to murder their families en masse.
That's
who you're
that's
talking
just
about.
Abject evil. If you're holding that up as an example, maybe you don't know the history, but if you do know the history,
He doesn't know this.
you've
got no clue.
invalidated yourself. Come on, man. You can't tell me that that's what you want to do.
He tried
Yeah.
to pass Quran 929 off as inspired because of the Byzantine Empire. He's got no grasp on history.
No. Sorry to say.
And I'm putting some historical context about that in the comments, just so that anyone who's there can read it. Jews were still second-class citizens under Islamic law, so don't think that did anything different there. Number two,
According to the Hadith, they're supposed to be killed en masse anyway.
yeah. So the Ottomans
Jews are supposed to be executed en masse,
Mhm.
according to Muhammad,
That's
because they
true.
rejected him as a prophet.
Exactly
So
right.
they should be
100%.
killed en masse.
Yeah. So
And
don't. If
The
anything,
the day of judgment will not come until you've killed all the Jews to the point that Jews are hiding behind trees, and the trees will cry out, say, Muslim or servant of Allah, or whatever he wants to say, slave of Allah, come kill this Jew behind me.
Except for one tree.
Except for one tree, the
The
tree, of the
Garca
Jews,
tree.
which no one knows what that tree is.
Well,
It
we'll
was a
find out
Garca tree.
because it'll be quiet. All the other trees will speak except for that one. Then you'll know which one it is.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of Jews behind all the trees.
It is.
Say, Levine.
So
Oh, this one's funny. This one's using the same thing that like some people say. This guy has no clear understanding. Muhammad had Jewish friends and companions. That's like when someone's racist and they're like, and you're like, hey, you're racist, and they say that's not true. I have Asian friends. It's like, all right, like you can still be racist even if you have a minority group. And number two, also look at what the Quran and the Hadith say. It doesn't matter, even if Muhammad had Jewish friends. Even if, what does the Quran say and what do the Hadith say? It doesn't matter. Just read what your brother in Christ. You literally just stated it like 15 seconds ago. What the Quran and Hadith teach about Jews. Can you just restate it one more time? Because clearly they were too busy typing. They didn't.
Oh,
they didn't
sure. First of all, you're supposed to kill all the Jews and Christians. Well, not all the Christians, but all the Jews until even a tree will cry out, or tree or rock will cry out. There, oh, slave of Allah, there is a Jew behind me. Come kill him. You also have for James there, I'll give you a reference, Quran 98:6, which talks about the Jews and Christians being the worst of all creatures. So Jews and Christians and polytheists.
That's what I say about my friends.
All Christians of all creatures. Period. They're subhuman.
Yeah.
According to the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
So again, even if you're saying, well, Muhammad he might have had some Jewish friends, well, they would have had to have accepted him as a prophet anyway, so they're not really Jews now, are they? They're actually.
Are you even
Muslims.
allowed? Are you allowed to have Jewish friends or Christian friends in Islam, or will Allah mistake you for one of them if that's the case?
the Quran's very clear. You do not have friends with Jews or Christians because they are friends of each other. And if you do have Jews or Christians as your friends, you are then of them. So you're actually a Jew or a Christian. My wife has a whole video on apostasy, and apostasy. You go to Reliance of Traveler, go to the section on apostasy under Sharia. You scroll down to the very bottom, and it's a very long section, believe me. It says, and so forth. There's so much more. We can't document it all. There's so many ways that we can become apostates. They don't even list all the options in Sharia. It just keeps going. There's too many. There's too many ways to violate it.
Maybe then, can you just pull up that comment from Al-Khattab? Muhammad had Jewish friends and companions. Because I think if that's the case, this could be a really, really serious issue if Al-Khattab's right. That was the 948 comment.
So yes, again, he just proved again that he's not a Muslim.
He just called Muhammad a Jew or a Christian.
Well, that Muhammad was an apostate. Now he's calling Muhammad an apostate. Well, he did commit shirk, which is undoubtedly. You can find that in the Mutawatir Hadith, the man in need, and the blind man, where Muhammad orders a man to pray to him instead of Muhammad, instead of Allah. So instead of Allah, you are to pray to Muhammad, and he will intercede for you. And he goes and tells him, go pray in the mosque. And when you pray, you address me, not Allah. Mm-hmm. Which would, again, be a little shirk. Just a little shirk in there.
Goodness.
All right. Horrible. Well, I think we pretty much nailed it. One thing I'd like to do is to compile some of these notes together, and especially with the sources that you guys have, bring them all together. Fantastic job for both of you, I think. I don't know, man. I'm convinced. Looks like it'd be very difficult to go Western versus Islamic Sharia. Very, very strict, going by the Hadith and the Quran to say this is how we're going to conduct war. There's going to be a definite clash between East and West. I don't see where they would see eye to eye on this at all. So I hope that's not the case. I pray for peace. Mm-hmm. And I pray that every Muslim does find the way. This is not an accusation against individuals. This is a hard look at what the scriptures of Islam say in regards to just war, and it does contradict. It does have some really scary applications to it that would not call just.
Yes.
Any last words from you guys? And I want to pick up on what you guys are doing. So last word plus what you're working on now and where people can find you. We'll start with you, Eric.
Sure. I am Eric from Your Brother in Christ. I run the YouTube channel, Your Brother in Christ. I focus mostly on Islam, primarily going to primary sources, Hadith, the Quran, and the Muslim scholars themselves. There are quite a few issues that I'll bring up quite a bit. I do want to add one more thing to the conversation, that in Islam, there are two houses. There's either the house of war, which is where the infidel is, or the house of Islam, where the Muslims are. If you're in the house of war, you are to be constantly fighting against the infidel. And there's only, if you look back at the history, and we saw this in Raymond Ibrahim's book, Defenders of the West. We saw this over and over again in the historical characters, that they would have peace treaties. The only times Muslim would pursue it, and again, this would be in line with what we showed from Sharia itself, peace just for you to build up and then go ahead and attack again. Peace for you to build up, go ahead and attack them again, and they would betray them at the earliest convenience. Look at the history of El Cid as one of the examples, as well as many of the others. Now, as far as my work goes, I will be back for a members only live stream tomorrow at 6 p.m. After that, I will be back on refuting Dawa TikToks. So I have 10 plus Dawa TikToks, and we'll see if I convert to Islam. We'll see, because these are supposed to be messages that can convert anyone to Islam. After all, dawah is the call to Islam. So we'll see how good or how much they fall up flat upon their face. We'll find out. See if my wife can join me for that.
That's awesome.
So
very good. David, what do you have going on? How can people find you?
Yes, well, go ahead and follow me on Be the Iron. That's my name on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all of those. Because we are called as brothers in Christ to be the iron. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one brother sharpens another. And so I pray that all of you who visit my channel would be able to be sharpened, whether you are a brother or sister in Christ, or you're a Muslim who needs to get all the rust of Islam off of you so that you can be a sharp sword that Christ would use for his own kingdom. So again, Be the Iron on YouTube. Tomorrow I have a live stream with, I'm pretty sure Hatun and I are meeting tomorrow morning. And so go ahead and watch that live stream. We'll be responding to some really fun videos from some Muslims on TikTok as well. And
cool.
if you, I'm really excited. Last week was pretty fun. Sneako's funny, but we'll be responding to some new ones. And if you're new to theology or anything like that, go ahead and get my first book, Sleepy Seminarian, Eclectic Essays #1. A bunch of the theological and philosophical essays, the first third of my essays from seminary, and it's now on Amazon. So that is the first one. Second one will have a lot more to do with atheism, but if you want a good introduction to theology and philosophy, Sleepy Seminarian is available because despite my sleep disorder... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It sounds like you were going to go into it. I was just going to ask about the name. You're not encouraging people to sleep.
Yeah, no.
Classes, right?
No, as a seminary student, I've had a sleep disorder for the past, guess what? That was junior year of college, so it's been a couple years. But I had a sleep disorder that developed a type of narcolepsy called hypersomnia, and so no matter what I do, I'm just always sleepy. And even going through seminary, I was terrified, thinking, God, how am I going to make it through seminary with this sleep disorder, where coffee and sleep and nothing really can allow me to stay awake? And this medication is not really good. You don't want to take hypersomnia medication for too long. After enough years of it, it's pretty horrible. So I was praying for God to make a way. And then I realized that whenever I spoke about God, I didn't need my medication. It was, and I kid you not, that to this day, that's still how it is. As long as I'm talking about Jesus, I don't need my medication. And that's why in my seminary, I was able to make it through, because I was just learning about God the whole time. And when I'm around people talking about Jesus, I don't fall asleep. The condition doesn't affect me. As of now, it has been about 2.5 years, I think it's 2.5 years since I've taken my last dosage of medication for the condition, because I started working as a Bible teacher. And so as a Bible teacher, I just talk about God all day. And so as long as I'm talking about God, I don't need my medication. I operate like a lively, energetic person. So by the work of Jesus Christ himself, I was able to stay awake as long as I talk about him. And that's a living testimony to who God is. So I'm a sleepy seminarian who has been woken up by the work of Christ alone. And that's just how good God is.
Very good. Awesome.
Yeah.
And we've had you on before and look forward to having you again. So
Yes.
On this channel, we talk about apologetics, current events, a lot about culture and especially different, believe it or not, does not sound like it tonight, but we also talk a lot about movies and books, because I think it's through culture that you can really make an impact, the way people think. And so I have my short story, the novel, The Healing Stone, which does talk about Islam in Al-Andalus, but it's in a novel form. It's also science fiction, so you have time travel and other things involved in there too. And so it's just one of a series. The next one's coming up, not the exact next one, but we're also going to be in Africa in the Mali Empire. So that those all come through like that. So, and then next week we have coming up, looking at Doctor Who, going from Islamic sources for Just War from the extreme to the sublime, talking about Doctor Who and the collapse of 20-year history with that. Why was it? What happened to it? And go from there. So I enjoy all the chat that's going on. really looking for people to have integrity, to look at things solidly and seek the truth. If you're going to seek the truth, you're going to find it. And hopefully you saw some of that tonight. And again, thank you all, and we will see you next week.
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.